Riding high, Donald Trump looks to turn a well-received speech into concrete policy.
Surging upward, the Dow Jones tops 21,000 points for the first time.
And stricken with grief, families struggle to cope with the rising body count in Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs. Thanks for your company, everyone. I'm Michael Holmes.
And hello, I'm Lynda Kinkade. Welcome to CNN Today. The White House is savoring the success of President Donald Trump's first speech to a joint session of Congress, meaning the lawmakers he must win over to push through his agenda.
A CNN OSC poll shows 2/3 of viewers who watched said that he had the right priorities for the country. In the address, Mr. Trump calling for national unity, which he's done before with little success.
This time he ditched the ominous tones and sounded a little more upbeat. Yet a day later, many are wondering if we witnessed a real change or just a rendering. Jeff Zeleny has the story.
As President Trump basked in the glow of his big speech to Congress.
Thank you very much.
The hard work of turning those promises into reality was the first order of business at the White House, with the president sitting down for lunch with Republican congressional leaders.
We're just here to start the process. It begins as of now, and we think we're going to have tremendous success.
Yet tremendous success depends not only on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Paul Ryan, but on persuading the party's rank and file to pay for his agenda. The president delayed again the signing of a travel ban to replace the one blocked in the courts.
We cannot allow a beachhead of terrorism to form inside America. We cannot allow our nation to become a sanctuary for extremists.
CNN has learned the Secretary of State, Defense Secretary, and National Security Advisor are all pushing for Iraq to be removed from the list of majority Muslim countries included in the ban. But in most of his primetime address, the president struck a more optimistic note.
A new national pride is sweeping across our nation, and a new surge of optimism is placing impossible dreams firmly within our grasp.
But it remains an open question whether it was a lasting pivot or a one-night performance after a rough start to his presidency. In either case, his wish list is an expensive and complicated one, even among Republicans, not to mention Democrats who are largely resisting the Trump agenda. From health care,
we should ensure that Americans with pre-existing conditions have access to coverage and that we have a stable transition for Americans currently enrolled in the health care exchanges.
To tax reform.
It will be a big, big cut. At the same time, we will provide massive tax relief for the middle class.
To infrastructure.
To launch our national rebuilding, I will be asking Congress to approve legislation that produces a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure of the United States, financed through both public and private capital, creating millions of new jobs.
After the speech, Speaker Ryan offered praise, but walked away when asked about the price tag.
I thought he did a great job.
Did he answer questions how he would pay for things tonight? Several fiscal conservative lawmakers said they could not support an agenda that would add to the nation's deficit. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said the plans would be paid for through economic growth.
It's the #1 issue. We've got to get back to sustained long-term growth rates of 3% or higher. We're going to have a tax plan that's going to bring business back to the U.S. and make it competitive again.
The president's biggest moment of the speech, still reverberating, was in his new role as commander-in-chief, when he paid tribute to the widow of fallen Navy SEAL Ryan Owens, who died in a raid in Yemen.
And Ryan is looking down right now, you know that, and he's very happy because I think he just broke a record.
Jeff Zeleny, CNN, the White House.
Well, much to discuss on those policies, who will pay for them, and so much more. Let's bring in Stephen Collison live from CNN Washington. Always good to see you, my friend. Reset or performance? The tone was different, but everybody asking, was it him?
That's the real question. There's been plenty of times when we thought Donald Trump was going to pivot to a more presidential posture throughout the campaign, the transition, and in his 5 weeks in office, that hasn't happened. I would say that was the most sort of presidential cadence we've seen from Trump since he took office at the end of January. And it's possible that the White House has decided that a more sympathetic, less aggressive performance by Donald Trump would help enact what is going to be a very ambitious agenda, Michael. You saw in Jeff's report there, big ticket items, infrastructure, tax reform, repealing Obamacare, and other issues there that are going to require a huge political lift. Each of those issues alone, I think, would be enough to consume Washington for 6 months or a year. Donald Trump's trying to ram all that through Congress, albeit a Republican Congress. So perhaps we're seeing a different demeanor from Donald Trump to try and get people on his side, to try and build political coalitions. It's been 24 hours since the speech. We've not had any sort of aggressive tweets from Donald Trump. He's not really hit out at any of his enemies. So right now, that demeanor seems to be holding, but he's going out on the road tomorrow, and who knows what's going to happen.
Stephen, it's interesting to note what he didn't say. He didn't mention Russia, although he did talk about NATO. He's in very glowing terms. He said, we strongly support NATO, an alliance forged through the bonds of 2 world wars. What should Russia make of that?
It was interesting that there was not actually that much in the speech about foreign policy. There was a section where he said that if the United States could make new partners, if it had common interests with them, it would try to do so. Some people saw that as a reference to Russia, but you're right. The days when Donald Trump was touting a new plan to really reinvigorate relations with Russia, which are at the moment in one of their sort of worst points since the end of the Cold War, where he was talking about fighting terrorism in Syria alongside Russia, appear to have passed. One of the reasons for that, I think, is there's been so much concentration on his alleged links with Russia, alleged ties between his campaign and Russian officials. I think that sort of narrowed the maneuvering room politically that Donald Trump has to move on the Russia issue. But generally, apart from restating his America First foreign policy, saying that he was going to eradicate ISIS off the face of the earth, there was not a great deal of foreign policy, and I think that maybe reflects where Donald Trump's interests lie. A lot of people have looked at the early weeks of this administration and sort of concluded that this is going to be an administration that's rather inward-looking, that's concerned with America first, taking care of America's economic problems, and has a much less of a focus, I think, on international foreign policy strategy.
And that certainly came across, I think, too, in the absence of foreign policy. I mean, you talk about his tone and whether that could be to elicit the inclusiveness he's going to need if he's going to get this legislative program up and running and through the House. But a lot of, and we didn't get many specifics, but there's a lot of stuff that's a departure, if you like, from traditional Republican orthodoxy. The tax credits that a lot of the GOP see as entitlements, which they want cut. He's going to protect Social Security and Medicare, promising to spend a ton of money on the military and infrastructure. Not much word on how that's going to be paid for. Isn't that the sort of stuff that could split part of his own party? A lot of fiscal hawks there watching that with some trepidation, one would imagine.
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump may perhaps be well advised to sort of lay off Democrats. He spent a lot of time sort of tweaking Democratic leaders like Chuck Schumer in the Senate and Nancy Pelosi in the House. He's going to need Democrats, especially to get that $1 trillion infrastructure package enacted. That's a centerpiece of his campaign. It's it's core to his attempts to improve the conditions for working class voters in the Midwestern states that sent him to the White House. He's going to need Democrats. And you're right, there are things in that program, infrastructure, Ivanka Trump's program to allow more family leave when a family has a baby, and national health care. That's going to cost billions of dollars. That's something that your hawkish Republicans in the House have always opposed. And on the other side, Democrats say it doesn't go far enough. So there's going to be a lot of splintered coalitions in the House and the Senate as Donald Trump tries to enact this agenda. What we've seen so far from the White House is that this is not necessarily a White House with much experience and political acumen. We saw that with the imposition of the travel ban. If they don't start to get smart soon in the ways of Washington, we're going to be having a report card in a year's time that says that a lot of these things haven't been enacted. So Donald Trump really raised the stakes for himself in this speech, and we're going to have to judge him against what he said.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Stephen, thanks so much. Always a great pleasure. Stephen Collison there in Washington.
Thank you. Well, President Trump is receiving praise from both sides of the aisle for his tone during Tuesday night's speech.
CNN commentator Van Jones describing one part of it as the moment Mr. Trump became president of the United States.
Well, here to discuss further is David Litte. He's a former speechwriter for former President Barack Obama. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Well, President Trump believes that he's been doing well so far, but has had trouble getting his message across. How did you rate his performance last night?
Well, I think purely as a performance, it was somewhere around a B or B minus, which for President Trump, that's certainly the best he's done yet. That's not a spectacular performance, but compared to certainly his inaugural, a variety of moments on the campaign, this was coherent. He sounded like a politician, and he strung some sentences together. And I don't mean this sarcastically. That's a first. So I think in that sense, the White House is happy about that tonight.
You know, as these things often are, and you take us behind closed doors, this was said to have been a team effort. And of course, a lot of people saying, you know, were they his words? Were they his sentiment? But that's what speech writing's about. I mean, from some of the reporting by Jim Acosta and Jeff Zeleny and others, there could have been half a dozen or more people involved in writing the speech. What normally goes into a speech like this?
Well, I'll say when I worked for President Obama, I never wrote a State of the Union address, but our chief speechwriters, Cody Keenan and John Favreau, they would spend months working with the policy teams and then also with the president. And so a lot of what you saw President Obama say in his State of the Union addresses, his addresses to Congress, really were his words. And when they weren't words that he wrote himself, they were often based on, you know, something that he would say in conversation to one of his speechwriters. They would go back and write it up and bring it back to the president. So different presidents do it different ways. In the White House that I worked in, the president was very hands-on with the State of the Union or a joint address.
During his speech, President Trump announced that he would form a new agency to deal with immigrant crime. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say.
I have ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims. The office is called VOICE, Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. We are providing a voice to those who have been ignored by our media and silenced by special interests.
Certainly, you could hear a reaction there from people listening. Why did that stand out to you?
Well, that stood out to me because it was one of the only big policy moments in the speech, and it was also one of the most dark American carnage-y moments that President Trump had. The statistics show that immigrants commit fewer crimes on average than the rest of the population. And this is an attempt to make it look like immigrants are inherently criminal, inherently dangerous. So for all of the comments about the tone and the ability not to always sound apocalyptic in the way that the inauguration did, things like this voice or vice or whatever you want to call it, those are not a change in tone. Those seem like exactly what we've come to expect over the first 30 days from President Trump. So he has a long way to go if he's going to win over people who are very scared after the first month of his presidency.
You know, it was interesting, the part with the widow of the Navy SEAL was obviously probably the moving moment of the speech. But, you know, that is a raid with a lot of questions that still surround it, why it was executed, the father very angry about that. What did you make of that, and what are the risks in a scenario like that of looking exploitative rather than sympathetic or empathetic?
Well, first of all, I mean, clearly, you know, the guest of the First Lady, the widow of the Navy SEAL who was killed, that was a very emotional moment, and I think her grief was real. The gratitude of the country was absolutely real. I mean, her husband was a hero.
Yeah.
That said, we don't know a lot about that raid yet. We do know that instead of making a decision about it at the Situation Room, President Trump made it at the dinner table with some of his political aides. That's not a good sign. And so it is possible that we will look back 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now and say, this was a moment when the president involved a widow of a dead American hero to score political points over a raid that he should have approached very differently. So we won't yet know. This is one of those things that in the moment it was absolutely emotional, but it could take on many other shades of meaning as an investigation proceeds.
Yeah, it's a risk.
Yeah, great to get a look behind the process and to get you on, David Litte. Thanks so much, former speechwriter for President Obama.
Thanks for having me. This was
Thanks
great.
so much.
Thank you. Well, we're going to take you live now to the White House, where Vice President Pence is swearing in Ryan Zinke as Interior Secretary. This is all happening in the Vice President's ceremonial office.
Now, Zinke was a congressman from Montana. He's now in charge of overseeing conservation of America's natural resources. He's actually going to oversee some 500 million acres of land, roughly a fifth of the nation. 59 national parks as well.
Big job ahead. Well, in just a few hours, 2 Republican critics of the president will put topics of Donald Trump's speech under the microscope.